Greetings all. While we are in England, we have swung by a town called Shrivenham, and the Defence Academy is located here. And we got a nice invitation, thank you very much, from Major Tom Mowat, who is here at the Technology Centre. So the first question is, what is the Technology Centre at Shrivenham? It looks like a tank museum, but it isn't one.
No, that's right. Technology school here is mainly to teach technology in about three main areas. So the idea is we look at weapon systems to see how effective they are. Different weapon systems, different armour systems, missile systems, things like that. Then we want to look at the human factors related to those. So is it a sort of weapon system that we can give to an uneducated Russian peasant, or do we need someone with a PhD in order to work it? That sort of understanding, the human factors, where are the safety systems, where are the systems that make it easy to spot the targets. And then lastly, we look at the procurement elements of those. So how expensive are they to design, to maintain, the logistics, how difficult is it to train people in order to use them and things like that.
Can members of the public come down and visit?
No, generally not, although some people can. We do have open days, we have the local scouts and people come in, but the camp is not open to the general public.
So who's your target audience then? Are you looking at people in the MOD procurement system, or is it more general?
Well, the audience is Ministry of Defence, so we run courses here to train people. The primary course for technology school is the Battle Space Technology course, which teaches young officers about technology itself, military technology overall. But we get people from procurement, we get people from all areas. We've even got 3D modelers who come in and do stuff like that.
So if somebody comes in here, he's on a course, how long is he going to spend in this hall with all the vehicles and aircraft?
Depends which course he's on. So for example, if he's on the guided weapons course, he'll see some of the bits down the far end, and we have a specific guided weapons lab. If he's on, we have a master's degree, and some of the modules of the master's degree will deal with armour systems, for example, gun systems. So depending on which part of the course, he'll come and have a look at practical examples of the real thing. So they'll look at laminated armours, for example, versus homogeneous rolled steel, and then look at the effects of HESH on them and those examples.
So is this more a case of the history and thought behind the design process, or is this also a capability centre, like what we in the US might call a petting zoo, where you see, okay, this is capable of destroying a tank at 3 kilometres, what have you?
Well, you've got the bold statistics, which lots of people can get hung up on. But then there's the usability of the system, and that's where the other elements come in. So the human factors. And they're little things. So for example, with this tank, when it first came out, you didn't press the accelerator to make it go forward, because you kind of wanted it to work in the way that a tractor used to work. So you put your foot down on the accelerator, started the engine, then took your foot off for it to go. Because you were going to drive incredibly long distances, so you didn't want the guy sitting there trying to hold the accelerator down the entire time. So you've got to understand the human factors in being able to use it in the way that will bring out the raw statistics of how it could be used.
So this is why you have this ancient T-34 here sitting opposite a Challenger 1.
Absolutely, because there's stuff you can learn from this fella compared to that one. This cost a lot less to build and was a lot less complicated. I mean, the classic example is the accelerator and the speedometer. So I've explained how the accelerator worked, but the speedometer, on that tank over there, you've got a finely gauged speedometer that tells you exactly how fast it's going. It's a tank. Who cares how fast it's going?
The MPs do, in my experience, because I got tickets.
Yeah, okay, but if you're going to war, the Russian idea was, all I want to know is it going to go forwards when I press the accelerator, or is it going to go backwards? Because I need to know that in case someone's hiding behind me. I don't want to crush my own guys. Yeah.
So is there anything else? I mean, what else how long would you spend, let's say, on a T-34 in the course of you taking this tour?
Sure. Well, it depends on, they come and look at specific aspects. So, for example, if I come in to look at gun technology, then the T-34-85 and the T-34-76 turrets are very good little examples. Because this is one of the first tanks with sloped armour, you've got quite a restricted size of turret ring. And the original T-34-76 had a very low turret. But of course, when they upgraded the gun, you got this massive gun with a lot more recoil. So the recoil length is huge. Now, they could only increase the size of the turret ring by about 1 inch. So they had to have this bulge, they had to have this much bigger turret in order to allow that gun to fit on the same chassis. So you might have that conversation that we've just had now. That's the point to learn from this weapon, and then go and have a look at the others later.
And they put this into practice, and later on in the course, you'd say they designed their own AFE.
They would design their own AFE, and depending on the requirements, so they go through the procurement system, they'd work out the requirements. Sometimes they use genuine requirements, some of those are classified, or they generate their own, and then at the end of it, they would attempt to design the system. And then quite often what will happen is they'll come to me, because I run the modelling and simulation part of the course, and then say, can we get a 3D model of it?
And when they're doing this designing, is it purely on combat capability, or do you also look into account procurement costs, logistical sustainability and all that? Does that all get factored as well? Absolutely,
that gets factored in. Yeah, quantity has a quality all of its own. So you've got to decide, what you want to do. So I've done procurement for quite a few years, and you can get into that black hole where people are just asking for lots of shiny little extras, and then you go, but it's just going to make it unaffordable.
So what's the stupidest design you've seen?
The stupidest design?
Yeah. When you get a whole bunch of amateurs coming up, you're going to come up with something that there's some basic flaw that says it shouldn't.
Well, we quite often get where the armour and fire suppression systems doesn't cover the cabin. So we're going, hang on a minute. You've got an armour and fire suppression system that covers the turret, but it doesn't cover the driver. Or you've got personnel systems which don't cover the crew compartment.
So what's the stupidest system then that has actually made it into steel that you have in here?
Well,
that you go up to it. This is an example of what not to do.
Well, we've got the Panthan Liaison vehicle, which started out as a really nice vehicle, but was subject to requirement creep. So it was a very simple requirement initially, which is we wanted a liaison vehicle for...
A big Jeep sort of thing.
Big Jeep. Be able to carry good radios. But then, of course, Afghanistan, counter-IED threat, so we stack a massive grey armour plate at the bottom. And then, of course, if it's on its own and there are problems, then we stuck a remote weapon station on the roof, which kind of made it heavy and overbalanced. And that was a bit tricky. So the vehicle started out quite nice and finished up incredibly overweight, underpad, and not quite as good as we'd hoped. But of course, what you do then is you upgrade the engine, which puts pressure on the drivetrain, and you end up with logistic problems. So, it's a good example of how things can go wrong.
So you presumably have one on the other end of the scale. It's kind of like, this is perfect to requirements, nothing more than it needs, and this is sort of the perfect blend of capability, affordability, logistics. You have one of those here. Then you go around all that. With national pride aside, no go to Challenger. So it's kind of like, this is somebody had his head screwed on the right way when he made this vehicle.
Ooh, well, that's a really difficult one, because when we have urgent operational requirements for things like Afghanistan, where people bring to market a specific vehicle for a specific problem, some of those are incredibly good at very low cost, very short time. The trouble is they are optimized to that specific threat at that specific time. So later on, when you try and use it somewhere else, they turn out actually, in some cases, to be absolute crap. But a good example of one that properly was considered is the Swedish S-tank. So you have a tank there which has no turret. the gun's inside the hull. It has its own dozer blade, so it can do a little bit of self-emplacing. And when you look at the statistics from World War II, the majority of enemy tanks were killed by self-propelled guns. And that's not a lot of thing that many tankies like to admit. So the S-tank is there, and it's absolutely fantastic in defence. And they did a lot of analysis of it in defence, and it was very good indeed. However, in offensive operations, it's really not that good. And of course, in dense urban operations, it's really awful.
That's really a problem.
So for the requirement that the Swedish had for it at the beginning, Space Invaders on the Rhine, mass Soviet invasion, then it was right. But, everything has its compromises, everything has its difficulties.
Fair enough. Any other tidbits about this particular tank since you're standing in front of it?
Well, the other thing, of course, I like about this is the infantry tank cooperation. So on the back of the Sherman, you've got the tank telephone with a little box, and you take the telephone out. On the back of this, you've literally got a doorbell. A little bit of armour sticks out the back with a circle in it. You press the doorbell, and the bell rings in the turret, and that's nice. And the Russians have it on one side of the tank, so you don't have to stand behind the tank. You can kind of lean across and press it. The Japanese version was a fake bolt in the middle at the back. So you had to stand right behind the tank and press the button. And if the guy reversed, you were in trouble.
That was the end of it.
This is a superior doorbell.
So do you talk about national trends of tank design? It's kind of like, let's say, the Soviets usually had low-profile tanks, low gun depression, and so on, and this is why they have that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can understand it. Russia's a big country. If you're out in the open terrain, you want a very low-profile armoured vehicle. If you've got rolling hills and more dense terrain, then the ability to have a gun that can depress more will reveal less of the tank when you're cresting and you're hull down. Yeah. And so you look at those. Now, of course, British tanks are trying to be all things to all men, because of course we had an empire and we were trying to make tanks that would be useful in Malaya, in Norway, in Britain, and elsewhere. So all our tanks were desperately trying to do everything. Whereas the Russians tended to look at more specialised vehicles. So in general, they tended to be lower, but some of them, weren't.
All right. So, any last comments you want to make about what we were about to see? So, before myself and Sophie are let loose on your collection.
No, have fun.
Fair enough, Major Mo. Thank you very much. It's been a great opportunity to come here.
Glad you could come.